All right, so today we're diving into something that could really shake things up, like fundamentally reshape the internet as we know it, decentralization. And, just to make things even more interesting, we're throwing 6G technology into the mix.
Yeah, buckle up. This isn't just about, getting faster downloads or anything like that. It's about who gets to control, like, the entire flow of information online and what that really means for you, as a user.
And our guide for this deep dive is this super intriguing research paper called 6G Decentralization by Stephen A. Wright from Georgia State University. Let me tell you, this paper, it's a wild ride. It really makes you think.
It really does. It challenges us to look beyond the hype, the excitement around new technology, and really consider what the consequences might be, especially with something as powerful as 6G is going to be, right?
Absolutely. So to understand all of this, the paper takes us all the way back to the beginning, the roots of the internet, which, might seem a little strange at first, but it makes a really interesting point about this whole decentralization thing.
Right, because, the early internet, it was actually built on these core principles of decentralization. Like the whole idea was to make it resilient so there's no single point of failure.
So instead of having this one central hub controlling everything, it was more like a network of all these interconnected nodes all talking to each other, right?
Exactly. And this whole approach, this design philosophy, it was actually driven in part by, believe it or not, the geopolitical climate of the Cold War.
Wow, really?
Yeah. The idea was to create a communication system that could actually survive, like even a nuclear attack.
Talk about resilience, right? But somewhere along the way, things kind of like shifted, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the internet became more commercialized, we saw these tech giants rise up,
Hmm.
and they basically built these empires on centralizing data and controlling access to information. And that brings us to what we call, Web 2.0.
Which is basically where we are now, right? Where a handful of companies have a huge say in like our entire online experience. But this paper, it argues that Web 3.0, with this new emphasis on decentralization, could be the counter movement that we really need.
Yeah, precisely. Web 3.0 is all about shifting that control, giving it back to the users, and it uses some really cool technologies to try to do this. Like one example is this concept called content addressable networks, or CANs.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first saw cans, I was like, what is that? But once I understood it, it's a really fascinating idea.
It really is. It's a totally different way of thinking about how we get information online. Instead of relying on these big central servers and domain names, imagine a system where the content itself, like the information itself, has a unique address.
So it's not about going to a specific website, but like finding the information directly, almost like you have a treasure map that leads you straight to the buried treasure.
Exactly. And if we're sticking with that analogy, right, think of NFTs as a way to verify, like prove that the treasure is real. They use these similar ideas of cryptography to prove you own something and, prevent fakes and stuff in the digital world.
That's a really cool way to put it. So the internet becomes this massive, like decentralized library, and we each have the keys to unlock whatever information we want.
Yeah. And because there's no one in charge, right, no central authority, it makes it way harder for someone to censor stuff or like mess with the data.
Okay, so we've got this idea of decentralization, how it could change everything. But now let's jump ahead, right? Fast forward to the future and talk about 6G.
Yeah, because here's where it gets really interesting. Everyone's saying 6G is going to be like insanely fast, way more powerful than anything we've ever seen. But the big question is, will it just give more power to the big companies, or can we use it to actually build a more decentralized internet?
It feels like we're standing at a fork in the road. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One path leads to like even more control for a few companies. But the other path, that's a chance to actually make the internet more fair and more focused on users, the people who are actually using it.
And that's exactly what this research paper is saying. It argues that right now, all the talk about 6G is just about making it faster, more powerful, without really thinking about how it'll affect us, the human side of things.
So it's like we're being handed the keys to this amazing supercar, but nobody's thought about like traffic laws or where we even want to drive it.
Exactly. We should be asking, what kind of digital world do we want to live in with 6G? And how can we use this idea of decentralization to get there?
Because it's not just about downloading movies in 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
It's about our data, our privacy, even our own identities in this digital world.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of human needs in the 6G era becomes really important. This research paper digs into some key areas where decentralization could really make a difference.
And I'm guessing this whole data sovereignty thing is at the top of the list.
You got it. It's about individuals actually having control over their own data, who can see it, how it gets used, even how people can make money off of it.
Which is huge now, right? Especially as the internet becomes more and more part of our lives, our homes, our phones, even our fridges are collecting data now.
It's crazy, right? And that's just the beginning. Imagine how much data will be flying around when everything is connected with 6G. Decentralization could give some of that power back to individuals, so we're not just being taken advantage of.
It's about taking back what we own in this world that runs on data. And speaking of ownership, the paper also talks about identity sovereignty, which seems like a big deal with all the data breaches and identity theft happening these days.
Absolutely. Decentralized identity systems could give us more control over our digital identities, making it way harder for hackers to steal our info or pretend to be us online.
So instead of all our info being stored in one place, vulnerable to attack, it's more secure, more spread out.
Exactly. And it gives you more control over what you share and who you share it with, which is essential for privacy these days.
Which brings us to another huge topic, privacy versus surveillance. It feels like every new technology just makes those lines even blurrier.
It's true. And this is a place where the paper gets really into the potential of decentralized solutions. Imagine a world where our devices can communicate and share information in a way that protects our privacy from the ground up, even with all of the surveillance tech out there.
So it's not about hiding, but about building a system where privacy is built in, part of how everything works.
Precisely. And this is where things get really cool because it makes us rethink how the internet is built, especially as we move towards 6G.
It sounds like decentralization could be the answer to this whole problem of how to be safe and in control online in a world that's just becoming more and more connected.
It could. But it's not just about the tech. It requires a different way of thinking about data, identity, and who has the power on the internet.
And I get the sense we're just scratching the surface here. We've talked about data, identity, and privacy. But I feel like there's a lot more to explore when it comes to what decentralization can do in the 6G era.
Oh, absolutely. Decentralization is like this multi-tool with uses in all sorts of fields. We're just starting to see what it can do.
Okay, so we've talked about how decentralization could really shake things up. But before we go any further, we've got to address something. How do you actually measure something as, like, complex and multifaceted as decentralization? It's not exactly like measuring, the length of a table.
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something that researchers are really wrestling with right now. It's almost like, how do you measure freedom or democracy? There are so many different factors involved.
Right, it's not as simple as saying, okay, we've got 50% decentralization, so next year, let's shoot for 75%.
Exactly. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's impossible. Researchers are working on like frameworks and metrics to try to assess different aspects of decentralization, especially when it comes to blockchain technology. Because, blockchain is often the foundation for a lot of these decentralized systems.
So when we're talking about measuring this stuff, what are we actually looking at?
One big thing is how power is distributed within a network. So for a truly decentralized blockchain, you wouldn't want one single entity calling all the shots, controlling most of the computing power or changing the rules whenever they feel like it.
Right, so no one's rigging the system, like making sure one country doesn't control the whole internet.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just, who has the power. We also want to measure things like how resilient the system is to attacks, how resistant it is to censorship, and how much the community is involved in making decisions.
So it's about the technology, but also the values behind it, making sure it serves everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. We're still figuring out the whole metrics thing. It's a work in progress, but there's a lot of research and discussion happening, which is a good thing. It means people are taking it seriously, trying to build a better future for the internet.
Which brings us back to 6G and this kind of crossroads we're at. We've got all this potential for both centralization and decentralization. So how do we make sure 6G doesn't just become like round two of the internet where the big companies get even bigger and more powerful?
Yeah, it's a real concern. I mean, look at 5G, right? A lot of the focus has been on connecting devices, the whole Internet of Things thing, which is cool and all, but often it feels like it comes at the expense of our privacy and control as users. And now 6G is coming along, promising even faster speeds, even more connections. If we're not careful, it could just amplify those problems.
So what can we do? Is there a way to push 6G in a more decentralized direction?
There are definitely some promising things happening. For example, some people are suggesting we build decentralized identity systems right into 6G networks from the ground up.
Now that sounds interesting. How would that even work?
Imagine a world where you have total control over your digital identity. all your data, everything. Instead of relying on Facebook or Google to verify who you are, you hold the keys. You're in control.
So no more making a zillion usernames and passwords just to have your info leaked in a data breach 6 months later.
Exactly. With a decentralized system, you'd store and share your info directly from your own device, much more secure.
That would be a game changer, especially with so much identity theft going around.
Absolutely. And it's not even just about convenience and security. Imagine being able to choose exactly what info you share and with whom without giving away the whole farm.
Like I could prove I'm old enough to watch a certain movie without giving away my birthday or address.
Exactly. It's about having more fine-grained control over your data, which is super important for privacy these days.
Okay, so decentralized identity is
Yeah.
one idea for a more user-friendly 6G. What else is out there?
Another exciting area is privacy-enhancing technologies. There are folks working on building these right into the core of 6G networks.
We touched on privacy earlier, but what are these technologies exactly? How do they actually work?
Well, there are different approaches, each with pros and cons, but let me tell you about a couple that I think are super cool. One is called homomorphic encryption, and it sounds like something out of Star Trek, but it's real.
Homomorphic encryption. I'll be honest, that sounds pretty intense. Break it down for me.
Basically, it's a way of encrypting data so that it can be analyzed and used without ever being decrypted.
Yeah.
So, for example, you could send your medical records to a doctor, they could run tests and everything, but they wouldn't ever actually see your raw data.
Wow, that does sound like science fiction.
Right. But it's a whole area of research, and it has huge potential for protecting sensitive data in the 6G world. And then there's something called differential privacy, which is another really clever idea.
Okay, I'm listening. Differential privacy. What's that all about?
So imagine adding just a tiny bit of noise to a data set, enough to camouflage individual data points, but not enough to mess up the overall picture.
So like you're hiding the individual trees, but the forest is still visible.
Exactly. It's a way to protect individual privacy without completely ruining the data for analysis. And these are just a couple of examples. There's a whole bunch of really smart people working on privacy tech that could be a game changer for 6G.
This is all sounding really promising. But are these just like pie in the sky ideas? Or is there a real chance they'll actually be part of 6G when it arrives?
That's the big question, right? The good news is that people are starting to wake up and realize that decentralization and privacy really matter, and there are more and more projects out there trying to make these things a reality.
So it really feels like we're on the edge of something big with 6G. But like you said, it all comes down to how we actually use it. Are there any concrete steps being taken to make sure 6G empowers people? That it doesn't just end up making the big tech companies even more powerful?
That's the question, right? And the good news is there are definitely some positive things happening. Like there are teams of researchers at universities and even some telecom companies exploring how to build 6G networks with this decentralized approach baked in. And there are some really cool startups popping up with innovative solutions for stuff like decentralized identity and data privacy, stuff that could work really well with 6G.
Startups, you say. That's always exciting. They're usually the ones who are willing to take the risks and really push the envelope. Any examples come to mind?
Oh, for sure. There's this one I've been following that's building a decentralized platform for the Internet of Things, and they're using blockchain to do it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So think about it. Right now, all our smart devices, our thermostats, our fridges, they're all sending data to these central servers controlled by, the big guys. But what if they could all talk to each other directly, peer to peer, forming this kind of distributed network where no one's really in charge?
So like my smart refrigerator could tell my smart oven to preheat dinner based on my schedule without needing Google or Amazon to be the middleman.
Exactly. And because it's decentralized, it's way harder for any one company to control it or
Yeah.
censor what information is flowing through. It puts the power back in the hands of the users, both the people and their devices.
I love it. But let's be real, is the technology really there yet? I mean, can it actually handle something as complex as a decentralized 6G network?
That's the million-dollar question. Honestly, it's still early days. We're talking about basically rebuilding the internet from the ground up, which means big advances are needed in things like cryptography, distributed computing, how to get all these computers to agree on what's true. It's complicated stuff, but that's also what makes it so exciting.
It's like we're standing at the dawn of a new technological era, and it's up to us to decide what it's going to look like.
Exactly. And that brings us back to something we've been saying all along. Awareness is key. Just by understanding these concepts and being part of this conversation, you're already doing something important.
So what can people do? It's easy to feel kind of powerless when we're talking about something as big and complicated as 6G.
I get it, but never underestimate the power of making informed choices. Be mindful of what you do online, who you share your data with, support companies and organizations that align with your values, the ones that are fighting for privacy and digital rights.
So it's about putting our money where our mouth is, supporting the companies that are doing things the right way.
Exactly. Choose apps and services that prioritize privacy whenever you can. Check out decentralized platforms, see what they're all about, and most importantly, stay informed. The more people who get this, who demand a better, more decentralized internet, the more pressure it puts on the big players to actually make it happen.
It's a call to action. We can't just be passive consumers of technology anymore. We have to be active participants in shaping the digital world we want to live in.
Absolutely. This isn't just about tech, it's about our basic rights and freedoms in this increasingly digital world. It's about making sure the future of the internet is one that empowers people, not just corporations.
Well said. This has been a seriously eye-opening conversation. I never would have thought a single research paper could spark such a deep dive.
That's the power of knowledge and asking the right questions. It can really open up new ways of seeing the world and imagining a better future.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What kind of digital world do you want to be a part of? The future is unwritten, and the choices we make today are the ones that will shape the internet for generations to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.